So I am Benjamin Chicka. I am a philosopher, not a game developer. And my talk is based on a book I have coming out in October that you're seeing the cover of it on your screen right now. And I've presented bits and pieces of this around the Boston area at Women in Games Boston, at Boston Game Loop, PAX East. So I'm excited that I've tested it out at all those places, and now the first public presentation that the book is done is at another Boston game event. So that makes me happy that it's been tested out throughout Boston. You might have been looking at the talk, and I'm calling myself a philosopher, but then like the word theology in the title. Academic titles are strange, and the way we define ourselves is, I could go on for hours about that. I belong to a group of philosophers that people were asking questions about ultimate meaning and these big questions about life before the big worldwide religious traditions latched onto them and restricted their thoughts to their own attempts to answer those questions. And that's the sort of philosophy I do, but there's marketing reasons, terms go on books. So you might be surprised to see the title, and then I'm not going to talk about any world religions, but I do this sort of philosophy that rather than looking at narrow questions like, do we know if our hands exist, we think about big questions about how we find meaning in life and how we should behave. And at the very least, indie developer Rami Ismail, formerly of Lambier Games, was nice enough to read an advanced copy of the book and give some words of praise. So if nothing else, he thinks I know what I'm talking about. The other fun first is that the publisher just created the website for the book and pre-orders went live. So I have a promo code for you, and you're also the first to receive that. So a bunch of firsts for this group today. I would say just go to Google and type in my name and then Baylor, which is the press, and it'll be the first result. And I'll put that code again at the end of the presentation. So if you actually find what I say interesting, then you can go look up the book. With the code, it's $35 with free shipping, which is really as cheap as academic books come. Whether that's affordable for you, I don't know, but it's good for an academic book. So the talk. So it's based on that book, and I want to give basically a 20-minute high-level overview today of two problems and two solutions that video games can offer. So one is a real-world problem that's solved by playing characters like yourself in a video game. And one is a real-world problem that's actually made worse in virtual environments, whether the internet or in games. And it's solved by encountering other sorts of characters in video games that are not like yourself. And for those of you who are game developers, which is most of you today, I think the general takeaway is about the importance of representation. Not just because people are talking about it and it's like a checkbox, but representation really, really matters. It touches upon these ultimate things that as a philosopher I think about. So it's maybe part inspirational, this talk, and part hammering home that there's a reason people talk about representation, and it's not just to check a box to appease people. It really does matter. So right off the bat, this is the first problem and the first solution on one slide. There's lots of people who cannot express themselves daily for a variety of reasons who can get to be their true selves within video games. So, for example, LGBTQ people, despite all sorts of legal gains in the country, are still mistreated, marginalized all throughout the country. But now we have games, and Gone Home was the game that kind of got me into video games and my academic work and was kind of the starting point of this book. We now have video games about being a lesbian in high school and the highs and lows of coming out that actually involve a lesbian on the development team. And I think there's something qualitatively different about the interactive nature of video games compared to a book or a movie about being a lesbian in high school that lets characters actually interact with characters like themselves who share their identity, and that provides a space where historically marginalized people can explore their identity, can develop the identity, and kind of have it be affirmed in the game when it doesn't always happen in real life. Now, if I was talking to just philosophers, I might use more abstract terms like this is a problem of essence versus existence. And for any other academics in the room or anybody who likes to keep up with philosophy, essence isn't a term that people in the philosophical world like to use nowadays. because it came from Aristotle, and for him it meant something like everything of a certain kind shares it. So all horses or all people share an essence that makes them a horse or a person. And that's problematic nowadays because it implies that it erases difference. So we're all the same essentially, and it gets rid of all the unique things that make us all different. It doesn't have to mean that nowadays. This first problem is just something like, I am who I am, and the existing structures of this world don't always allow that to be realized. So this slide, it's picking on the United Methodist Church specifically, but it's because they're still debating this. A lot of Protestant Christian denominations have actually come to accept at least gay marriage and gay members. They could probably be doing more with transgender rights. But the Methodist Church is about to split over the issue on gay rights, probably. And this first problem of essence versus existence is something just like, say somebody is a transgender Christian and their church is persecuting them and not letting them to be a part of it. Their essence is in tension with existence. This problem is also what happened with Gamergate. Gamergate was around the time that I started giving these sorts of talks and getting into the industry, and it was essence versus existence. Somebody's a woman in gaming. I want to make different sorts of games that are more experimental about my experiences maybe, and the existing structure of games says, no, games are not that. That's not what the existing game world is about. That's the problem of essence versus existence. But fortunately, and I do think Gone Home is in part to be credited for this because its success led to so many other experimental sort of games being accepted. There are now so many games that let you experience and let you hear the stories of others that weren't always told in the industry. So this is If Feel by Dreamfield, led by Laura McGee. It's one of my favorite games from last year. It's basically a queer coming-of-age story. It tells the story of Cassio, a transgender woman, and how she's treated differently by her family and friends. And it's on the PC, and your cursor is an eraser. Your mouse cursor is like a pencil eraser in the game. And it really conveys, I think, the experience of having the correct pronouns used or the correct name used. If they're not used, you can feel like being erased. If they are used, you can maybe feel like reversing the erasing process and being created anew for the first time. And when I give talks about these sorts of issues and apply philosophical terms like essence and existence at conventions, I almost always get some LGBTQ gamer that comes up to me and basically, without using the terms, uses the terms and describes to me how they get to be themselves, be their true selves in games like this that aren't practically possible day to day. For good reasons, like their own safety. They might like physical safety, job, career safety, because it's not always safe to just be honest about who you are. And while those structures should absolutely change, at least in games like this that have been developed in more recent years, these historically marginalized people and still marginalized people have a chance to, while facing oppression in their daily life, the games become a means to personal fulfillment and affirmation, at least in that virtual world. So if existence, if daily life doesn't affirm their worth, at least there's now games that do that, and that's significant. Now, what I've said so far is basically you can be affirmed in a game, and the real world doesn't always give that affirmation. Ideally, I think we would like the real world to change as well and provide that sort of affirmation. But that's a more, I think, sticky, challenging problem, and that's the second point for today. So, and it leads to philosophical ethics, which is primarily about ourselves and other people. Now, we can mistreat and abuse ourselves, but really ethics is about how our actions impact other people. And this is Emmanuel Levinas on the screen, and he was a philosopher whose thought developed in the wake of surviving the Holocaust. And that's significant because he thought that a basic fundamental point about how we are to treat other people had been forgotten as philosophy became more specialized. So now there's all sorts of disciplines in philosophy, so epistemology, logic, metaphysics, and the result was stuff like, well, how do we know X, Y, or Z? Are we logical? Are we sound? Like, how do we know our conclusions about that are true? And then, like, what do we actually know about them? And then that results in ethical questions like, well, am I only to be nice to this person if I learn this list of things about them? And then can I be sure I know that? And that can lead to great atrocities. Like, that is what the Nazis did, basically. Like, we're only going to be nice to the Aryan race. So you got to be white. You have to be a Christian, in quotes. They even persecuted the German Christians. But that sort of knowledge-based ethics can lead to all sorts of atrocities towards other people. So Levinas said the following. Basically, what was forgotten in philosophy was ethics is all about myself and others. And his point was that we are all others to each other. So I am an other to all of you. You're all others to me right now. And all of you in the audience are each an other to one another. And what he was trying to convey was, before you learn anything, before you go engage in epistemology, metaphysics, logic, before you gain knowledge about any other person, their otherness is something that calls out to you. And he used the phrase constantly, "Don't kill me," which he meant literally, because his whole family was murdered by the Nazis in the Holocaust. But it basically means to respect the existence of that other, like whoever they are, before you learn anything about them, as if learning something would qualify them to be respected. Before you do that, everybody deserves respect. And then when you're encountering the other, your job is just to respect them. Now, this sounds simple, but the problem is the world is a more difficult place, and this is not often how we think about ourselves and others. So this is my colleague, Andrew Tripp, and we sometimes give presentations about video games and philosophy together. And these are his slides he likes to use, so I'm going to use them too. We like ourselves. We can be hard on ourselves, but generally we're comfortable. We know ourselves. We're familiar with ourselves and maybe our family and those like us. And when it goes from ourself to then family to friends to then maybe just people in the same town to the same country and then other country, the more remote it gets, we're not as comfortable with it. So we tend to be more harsh towards others. They're not ourselves. They might frighten us. They're not comfortable or familiar to us. And this is a lovely picture that he got of me after my stunned face. If you were in Boston in 2015 with our record snowfall, I think I shoveled snow for 30 hours in the span of 1 week. So anyways, good times that was. So Levinas has a simple point, but it's a difficult world in some ways. We actually have biological means of avoiding this problem of those previous two slides. Kind of, we are kind towards ourselves and people like us, and mean towards people who are different. I mean, that's how kids grow up. All over the world, kids bully one another. But then you reach a point where, bullying hurts people and they don't like it, both physically and psychologically, and then you stop. And it's in part based on mirror neurons, and we get this feedback loop of when we see someone else experiencing a little bit of pain, we kind of experience a bit too, and the same with pleasure. And that's why we feel good when the good guys win in a movie or TV show, and it's why we cringe if you see a character doing something so embarrassing in a movie or show, and it's like, it's in part mirror neurons. The thing that's made worse in virtual environments and the internet, and especially over the past year and a half of the pandemic, is this feedback that kids kind of learn, and the stopping point of, this isn't good, I shouldn't do this anymore. It's missing on the internet because it's based on face-to-face, like seeing somebody's face and reacting. So this is going to be a brief, like really, really brief. As I said, this is kind of a high-level overview. Overview of some neuroscience work I did working as a researcher for the Center for Neuroeconomic Studies in Claremont, California. And the point is just, so you may have questions about the neuroscience. The point is just to get you to see how the internet can make this worse. So this is oxytocin, literally it's chemical makeup. The press likes to give it all sorts of nicknames because it was first discovered in nursing mothers and their children. They had increased levels of it in their blood, which means they had increased levels of it in their brains. So it was initially thought to be the biological basis for like the tendency to nurture, so mothers nurturing their children. But we know it does a lot more than that now, and it's basically responsible for a lot of pro-social behavior. And it can be as simple as if this conference was in person, you see your friends and you shake hands or give a hug, you'll get a little spike of it by offering that kind gesture to your friend. They'll get a spike of it by receiving that gesture. And then if they reciprocate to you, you get an even higher spike of it. So it's kind of just, it went from the cuddle chemical to the guy who runs that lab, Paul Zak. He wrote a book called The Moral Molecule. It's the basis of a lot of pro-social behavior. So if I give you help, I get an increase of it for being nice. You get an increase of it for receiving the help. And because you get an increase of it, you're actually more likely to help other people. So it's kind of just starts this pro-social cycle of kind of just being nice and friendly and helping others. And it started with in-person tests, but the lab has since tested video clips, movies, and has since done even tests with social media, so before and after using Twitter. And positive interactions in those spaces got almost the same increases in oxytocin in the brain as in-person interactions, which I think to a lot of people here, it's just some scientific data behind common sense. Like, we knew the internet was real. The academics are maybe just slow to coming around to that. The problem is that online, the inverse also applies. So dihydrotestosterone is kind of a uber testosterone. It's just very powerful, strong testosterone. It not only inhibits oxytocin release, so prevents you from having a spike in oxytocin. Testosterone makes you very aggressive and angry. And poor interactions in person result in that. And so do poor interactions online. The problem is that online, that mirror neuron that like tells you, stop, this is hurting other people, is missing. And that's why things like Gamergate, maybe not only to be, it's not shocking that it happened, it could have been predicted. Those harsh interactions, when it goes wrong online, they can snowball out of control really fast. And there was a group out of the University of Amsterdam that did a study of this kind of dark side of oxytocin, where they had participants in the study play the trolley problem out, make choices in it, where a train is out of control on tracks and it's going to kill 5 people. And you can either let those 5 people be killed, or in this version of the problem, you can push somebody onto the tracks and that person will die, but the 5 will be saved. And they actually found out that in this study, they used mostly students at the school, and the students were more likely to let the 5 people die if they had Muslim-sounding names, or if they did some versions of the experiment where they had them with brown skin versus the person on the bridge had white skin, and they would almost always save the person with white skin or Dutch-sounding names. And that's a problem in the country right now. Amsterdam is having a lot of Islamophobia, and it's a very homogenous country in some ways with its population. And for them, the conclusion was something like in-group, out-group hostilities are inevitable. Oxytocin might make us nice towards people like ourselves, but it's inevitably going to create hostility towards the out-group. They're not us. They are that slide with my friend Andrew and me. They are the other that is scary and not to be trusted. But I don't think that's the takeaway. For me, it's just an indication that in these virtual environments, we just need to encounter more diverse others. So our in-group isn't defined solely by people like us. That problem with the Dutch students just favoring people who looked and sounded like themselves. So my argument, and we're possibly going to do some neuroscience studies. So this is just straight up philosophy. There's not any scientific data backing this up. But what I think is that we can actually cultivate empathy towards the quote unquote out group by making them part of our in group by just encountering them more regularly. And games can help achieve this. We can diversify our in group by experiencing different sorts of characters in games, kind of encountering Levinas's other that we might naturally kind of be afraid of or reject. And the one game I'm going to give for the example of that is Papers, Please. Love this game. made by Lucas Pope back in 2011, I believe. And if you're not familiar, this might date me, but the gameplay is kind of like, for me, a highlights magazine of 2 pictures and 10 things are different in the 2 of them. But what's so compelling about it in terms of this talk I'm giving is that while you're basically at a Eastern European border in a fictional country, and you're just inspecting people's passports, letting them into the country or not. And it's up to you what you do. But while people are standing there and you're inspecting their documents, they give you sometimes benign stories, just like, oh, I'm on vacation, I'm visiting. But sometimes they say, the man behind me is going to sell me into sexual slavery. Well, please don't let him in. I'm smuggling in medicine for my sick loved one who can't get it in this country. I'm fleeing war and certain death. And it's those sorts of pleas that like kind of just respect who I am and like give me the basic amount of human help that we're so bad at listening to sometimes, that Levinas wanted to highlight, and that some games can actually put right in front of our faces, literally in front of our faces with this, because we're looking at the face of the person giving the plea. And then it's up to you how you respond. I think this game is such a, I use it when I teach Levinas in some of my classes, and it's gone over really well. There's other games that could be used to make this point. I think If Found also, the game I previously mentioned, puts, if you're not transgender, it puts you face to face with the call of kind of respect who I am, at least use my name and proper pronouns, which is the conflict in the game. Others could be mentioned. 1979 Revolution does a great job of putting you face to face with Muslims who are still so marginalized, especially, I mean, the previous president had, the administration directly targeted them and tried to ban them from the country. And Cart Life does a great job of dealing with the kind of issues that the economically marginalized face. So these are just a few games. There's so many more. And like I said, for developers, the takeaway is poor representation in video games can lead to something like that Amsterdam scientific group, their conclusion that this in-group, out-group situation is fated. Whereas I think good representation can lead to something like there are no in-group, out-groups if we eventually get so comfortable with encountering others and listening to them, we just have big one diverse group. And we'll still have differences and disagreements maybe, but it won't become this snowball of hate because we're used to encountering them. So those are my 2 problems, and those are my 2 solutions from video games. I hope you found it interesting. I thank you for coming to the talk, and I'll once again just let you know how you can find the book if you're interested in it. If you comments, questions, want to talk about it, there's my email. And thank you for your time. And we have about 6 minutes for questions. And like I said, I'll also hang out afterwards in the networking lounge. I'm happy to share more detail on the science or a specific piece of philosophy if I kind of blew through everything too fast. And if you lose the code, you can share it widely if anybody's interested in this. You think they might be. It's not exclusive to you in this room. You can give it to anybody. So, all right. Well, I'll just end again by saying thank you. And you should play If Found. It's genuinely one of my favorite games of the last year. And thank you for tolerating a philosopher crashing your game conference. I love coming to these things. So thank you.